Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
This sponsorship brought to you by Success in Hiring. Are you struggling with recruiting, hiring, and retaining the right candidates for your business? I know the challenges you face every day running your business. Let me help you by sharing my Success in Hiring system with you. It is a 5-part series where we will cover these 5 areas. 1, recruiting. Number 2, interviewing. Number 3, hiring. Number 4, onboarding. And number 5, coaching. You will receive 1 video each day along with the downloadable resources to make it easy to implement the areas we covered that day. The best part of the series, it is totally free. Why? Because my goal is to help business owners succeed in business and life. To receive the series, go to chargepodcast.com and click on the Success in Hiring link. Welcome, Chargers. Can you believe 2022 is moving fast? Like every year, it goes faster every year. They say that when you get older, but when you get older, you really know that happens because I'm one of those individuals. So I am so glad you came back to listen to us today. And we've got a great guest lineup, but Paul Larsen is with us, and I'm going to tell you all about him. But before I do, Paul, can you tell me what solution or problem are you going to solve for our listeners today?
Thank you, Gary. I am going to help people celebrate their imposter syndrome. I'm going to help people celebrate when they are feeling like a fake or fraud in life. And I'm going to help them celebrate it so they thrive with that and not just survive as we begin 2022.
All right. I love it. This is going to be a great conversation because we all have a little bit of that imposter syndrome in us. So this is going to be a fun conversation. But while we get into that, can you share with me, what are 3 questions you're going to answer for our Chargers today?
Absolutely. And I'm hopefully going to answer more than just 3, but the 3 key ones are, well, we talk about imposter syndrome and it's out there a lot, as you're saying, and it's been around, but what is it? What is it exactly? How do I know when I'm experiencing imposter syndrome versus just maybe having a bad day? And what can I do? What are the steps that I can do to make it integrate, celebrate, and overcome it? Although, Gary, overcoming it as we start this beautiful year out, overcoming it sounds like a lot of hard work. So I really like to make it easy. What can I do that's easy to make imposter syndrome work for me?
Oh, this is going to be fun, folks. So let me give you a little bit of bio on Paul. Paul went from flipping hamburgers on Main Street to leading HR for a Wall Street. Paul has continually reinvented his distinctive voice to thrive within the craziness of the ever chaotic world. And we all know how that is. As an imposter syndrome survivor, Paul has learned to tame his fake and fraud voice and has successfully coached hundreds of leaders and teams to celebrate their imposter and to find their voice of confidence so that they can share their inspiration with others. His practical and sometimes laughable, so we're going to have a great conversation here, life experiences led him to offer an award-winning coaching book, Find Your V.O.I.C.E, as a leader. Paul's coaching portfolio includes working with talented global teams and leaders at Twitter, Microsoft, Electronic Arts, SAP, and Cisco, along with many successful life entrepreneurs looking to make their mark on the world. A certified Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Center coach, he's a contributing author with Forbes Coaches Council and the founder of Find Your V.O.I.C.E as a Leader Institute. He offers transformative coaching journeys to find and use distinctive voice and strength to be your best self. Paul, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Gary. I am charged up for this Charge Podcast. Wow. And that was a mouthful. You know, it's like when I listen to that bio back, you want to talk about imposter syndrome. I'm like, who is he talking about? Like, I wrote that. But it's like, really? That's really me? So I'm right there with you, right in the middle of it right now when I hear that bio come back to me, because it's sort of like, I'm not so sure about all that, you know?
That's right. But you've done some great things, and we want to be able to share that with the audience. But let's just jump right into it, because I'm a believer in they want to really hear, because we've all have thoughts what imposter syndrome is. But when you really think about it and you defined it, what is imposter syndrome? Would you tell us?
Yeah, really, the easy way to think about imposter syndrome is it's when we think we have to be somebody else to be successful. Hence the word imposter. The life we're living, the job we're doing, many times it shows up in our career, in our work, the position we have, whatever we're doing, it's like, I have to be somebody else to be successful as this manager, as this CEO, as this architect, as this parent, any kind of role we have. So it's not so much, Gary, feeling like we have to have more confident. I can be a very confident imposter. I can be very confident for you. Right now, I think I'm like exuding confidence, right? But it's what's happening inside of us, in our mind. Obviously, the brain is a leading cause of our stress. In our mind that says, no, Paul, you have to be somebody else in order to be successful. And that's where we start to feel like, a fake or a fraud. So in a nutshell, that's imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I love that concept, and really kind of a great timing for this, because, Paul, last fall, we saw what went on, the great resignation of 2021 and all the headlines we saw. And, people are really kind of asking themselves after 2 years of this pandemic, we're really asking, is this what I want? And the thing I tell people is, you can just fall into that, or you can really discover yourself. And to me, some of that imposter syndrome is really discovering ourselves, because we have to know within inside of our mind. So I'm kind of curious how you believe in how important that is to know thyself.
Oh, it's extremely important. And Gary, you hit the nail on the head around, if anything, the last couple of years with the pandemic has offered us the ability to kind of open up our mind and to really look to say, what are we thinking in here? And I always like to use this for myself and also for my clients. We are so choosy about the cars we drive, about the clothes we wear, about the food we eat. How many times have you had arguments about, I want that food and not that food, or I want to go to that restaurant, not that restaurant, when we could go out to all the restaurants, right? But we are not as choosy with the thoughts that we think in our head. We let any thoughts we want go right through any kind of filter we have. Oh, no. I want that sweater. I want that pair of pants. Oh, those shoes are really cool. But oh no, when it comes to a thought in our head, which is going to influence us much more than a pair of shoes, we will let any thought in. The National Science Foundation in 2005, so that's going on like 15, 16 years now, they did a study, and they said the average adult can process anywhere from 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Now, those numbers, even to me, if you get beyond 500, I'm kind of lost a little bit. But if you think about the number of thoughts that come into our mind every single day that we choose to allow in, and we let them nest there, so to speak, that has every type of influence. Because, Gary, before any kind of action, before we do any kind of decision, there's always a thought. And so they also found that something like 85% of the thoughts tend to have a negativity bias, and about 90% are from the day before, i.e., so they come from the past. And again, we're just letting these thoughts in. So to your point, the last 2 years have allowed us, just like a dietitian or a nutritionist will tell you to write down the food you eat if you want to know what you're taking into your body and how to maintain your health. We need to do the same type of an assessment with our thoughts. We need a thought diary. It's something that I've utilized, where you write down some of the thoughts that come into your mind so you can see how you're skewing your thoughts to your actions, because that's going to create your environment.
Yeah, that is so true. And I love that you reference that, because in my speaking, I talk about that steady about those 60,000 thoughts. And I think it's over 80%, like you said, of negative thoughts that we allow to come in. Yeah. And I talk about all the time, if we're going to overcome that, we have to be the one to choose that change. So I think it really sets up your second question that we wanted to talk about. And we've talked a little bit about it, but how do we know when we're experiencing it? Because we know, okay, we've got to change our mind. And that's always great to say, but how do we know that we're truly experiencing to start making that change?
Yeah, beautiful question. Great question. And it's one thing to sort of, as you said, kind of identify with what imposter syndrome might be, especially from the scientific definition. It's been around since the late 1970s as an identified, quote unquote, phenomena. But to actually experience it is more of an art. And the way we experience it is when you have feelings that you're kind of a fake in what you're doing. You're kind of a fraud. Those are two words that come out a lot. Up to 90%, Gary, of successful professionals have experienced imposter syndrome at one time or another in their life. And the common thread through all of those experiences has been they've been in a situation, maybe it's a new job, maybe they just had their firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn child. They've been in something that they're doing that is new. That's stepping out of their CZ, that comfort zone. And they're feeling, I'm kind of a fake at this. I'm just kind of faking it, or I feel like a fraud. And then the third linchpin on that is at some point, those of us that experience it are going to feel like we're going to be found out. That literally, somebody's going to come up and tap us on the shoulder and say, Paul, we recognize now that you really don't know what you're doing here, that you really are a fake and you really are a fraud. They're going to just mirror us back. We're going to ask you now to leave. You don't belong with this group of experts, leaders, parents, whatever, teachers, whatever it might be. So it's those kind of things where we feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm faking it. I'm a fraud. And one of these days, I'm going to be found out. And that's what happened to me back in 2007. I became head of HR at a $3 billion organization. And I was like, I felt like a fake or fraud. I literally did. And I thought, I'm going to be found out. They're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing. And they're going to ask me to leave. And what the crazy thinking is around that was the folks that would have asked me to leave would have been from the HR organization. That was what was playing in my head, which was the organization that I was leading. Is that kind of like crazy thinking and the irony? Of course, but that's what was playing in my head the whole time. And so somebody finally said to me, do you feel like, one of my mentors said to me, do you feel like a fraud? And Gary, when she said that to me, it was like music. It was like, I heard all the like, oh, bah, 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 bah. It's like, that was it. And I said, yes. And she goes, yeah, you have imposter syndrome. As if it's, just another checklist that I had not been aware of. So it's feeling like a fake or fraud, and then feeling like you're going to be found out. Those 3 F's are kind of the indicators with imposter syndrome.
Well, I love this conversation because it really sets up, because you talk about the thoughts. Now we talked about, how do you know you're experiencing it? I did a speaking engagement last night, and I'll be honest, on my way up, I was allowing those negative thoughts to come in and kind of thinking, okay, why did they choose me? I'm kind of the positive culture mentor I talk about. I'm going to talk about positive culture, and allowed to come in. And I really had to stop that because I was sabotaging myself. And I told myself, okay, you were chosen because you've written a book on this. You've done some research on this. You know what you're talking about. You know that you're not always positive, because none of us are 100%, but you found ways to make yourself become more positive. But we allow those thoughts. So the thing I want the audience members to know, it's not just anyone, everyone has these thoughts.
Yeah.
I mean, the most successful people, in sports and athletics, yes. I can guarantee you people that's been on top of their game, they've had the same challenges sometimes when they're coming in that big game, but they know how to control the mind to be able to change it. So I guess it kind of really goes into it. It may kind of fall into that question that I have is, what is successful professionals, we say here, but what do successful people do that when they're experiencing it, they change that. So they don't go down the road to say, okay, I'm that imposter. I am that. Instead, how do they bring their self and move themselves forward?
Absolutely. So when you look at all the folks that have admitted to it, you've got the Serena Williams of the world.
Yeah.
You got the Tom Hanks. You've got the Howard Schultz, who's the former CEO of Starbucks. They have all admitted to having imposter syndrome. And you're absolutely right. It's the ability to step out of yourself for a moment. And hello, we should be good at that because we're imposters. So if I'm feeling like an imposter, I should be okay stepping out of myself for a moment and looking at myself and saying, oh, wait a minute. I'm not a fake or a fraud. I am having feelings that I am a fake or fraud. Notice that little pivot there. Notice that little finesse. I'm not owning the feeling of fake or fraud. I'm observing as if I'm a third party looking at me, as if like what you're saying, walking up to your stage or walking up. And I've been there with you on that. It's like following certain people. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I going to do? Close the curtain? What do they have me here for? It's observing to say, oh, I'm feeling like a fake or fraud right now. Or hello, this is my imposter voice talking. That's what I use. I call it out. I call it my imposter voice. And I said, that's just my imposter voice talking. And if you really think about it, in the heart of hearts, it's trying to protect us from doing something stupid, from looking stupid, from perhaps falling down on ourselves, right? Which we're not going to do. And if we did, okay, we learn from that, as we've all had in our lives. So it comes from a place, if we can understand this, it comes from almost a benevolent place. So that's where, when I recognize that, and I recognize the fact that there's so much out there to say, how do you overcome it? As I mentioned earlier, I'm like, I go, the last few years have just been like tiring and people are fatigued. 2022, we're in this beautiful year now. I want it to be like easy. So I don't try to overcome it. I'm like, you know what? It's here. I'm living with it. It's a part of me, and I'm going to make it work for me. So instead of trying to silence it all the time, I'm going to celebrate it. Because when that imposter voice pops up, and it does, just like it did with you, as you mentioned last night, it will pop up sometimes where we just have we have the door open. It will just pop up, and I just say, you know what? That means I'm doing something new. It means I'm trying something new. It means I'm doing something uncomfortable. It means I'm growing. It means I'm learning. It means I'm in a situation where I am doing something in my life that my imposter is trying to shut that door back up and say, get back to where you are. And it's an indicator that I am growing and that I am nesting in the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset, as you're well aware, because that's this is your expertise, the fixed mindset where our imposter lives and thrives. And so for me, it's about not so much overcoming it. It's about saying, thank you, imposter. I've got it from here. I'm going to go forward and I'm doing something new here. Sure. Can I feel uncomfortable? Absolutely. Will I have still feelings of awkwardness or like I have, 5 legs and 8 hands? Sure. Many times I might. But I recognize that to mean, okay, this is something I've not done before, or I haven't done it to the extreme that I have consistency, and I'm learning. And I'm going to celebrate that, not silence it.
What a great thought for early in 2022, because we know that some people have set some goals, but then now they've fallen into the rut or kind of that imposter. And they said, oh, I can't do it. I don't care if it's exercise. I don't care if it's a business goal or what. They've kind of now decided, okay, I'm almost going to go back to that comfort area because I don't, I feel like I'm that imposter. But instead, I love what you say is celebrate it, bring it out by you learning and growing. And we know that's how we become who we want to be, is by that learning and growing and having that growth mindset and being willing to change, And we will fail sometimes because, easy one is exercise. How many people put that on their New Year's resolution? and it's early in the year yet. And guess how many people have already stopped doing it,
Exactly.
but it
Exactly.
becomes a habit, and it becomes a habit goal that you can create. If you failed up to this point, you don't have to. When that alarm goes off, you're just going to have to set up a system instead of saying, oh, I can't do this. Yes, you can. And it's celebrating, saying, no, I'm not going to allow the imposter, which the imposter's telling you, stay in bed, get more sleep. It's cold outside, it's hot outside, whatever the excuses that they have. So I love how you talk about celebrating it.
Yeah. Your analogy there was brilliant. The gym, the proverbial health club, when we is probably one of the areas that we don't always think about, but it's where the imposter syndrome just loves to thrive on all the cardio and all the weights and all the lifting that goes on there and all the aerobics. It's full of imposters all over, because you go to a gym, you go to one of those health clubs, and you're looking around. And if you're like me, it's like, what am I doing here? I can barely get on this bike. I can barely even start a treadmill. They're going to think I don't know, but they're going to ask me to leave. I'm going to fall off the machine, blah, 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 whatever, all those things that play out in our heads. That is a brilliant analogy and a brilliant model, because you're absolutely right. And what happens is what you said at the beginning of a new beginning, like we're in 2022, people have chartered a goal for themselves to say, I'm going to lose X, or I want to get in shape, or I'm going to condition. But what they do, and the goal might be wonderful, and that vision might be incredible, but we need to take baby steps around that. Babies don't get out of their crib and start walking and running around the room and taking these large steps. If they do, then you've got like an incredible baby, and a little scary one at that.
That's right.
Babies take little steps, they fall. They take more steps, they fall. They go back. They get help from their parent, adult, guardian, whoever that might be, another little kid. They take these little steps, and they're called baby steps for a reason. Pretty soon, the baby gets more comfortable. The baby's not sitting there saying, I shouldn't be walking. I'm not going to be, what am I doing walking with all these people? I'm an imposter. No, the baby's like, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to take little steps around that. And if you think about it now, fast forward 20, 30 years, 40, 50, 60 years for myself, we don't necessarily think that way. We think in these grandiose visions. Oh, by this, I'm going to lose this weight, or get in this shape, or I'm going to look like him by the end of this. Versus the baby step might be, I'm just going to go to the health club today and walk around and just kind of familiarize myself with something and walk out. Like a very simple goal. I don't even need to do any exercises yet. You take the baby steps to familiarize yourself, and that's what helps dilute the voice. That helps to, again, I'm not about silencing it. It just helps to kind of dilute it a little bit. And then you take the next step the next day, and so forth and so on. It's like anything else. That's a great analogy. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I truly appreciate you sharing that. And there's so many different ways we can go. I think, though, as we're coming up on that time before we go to the recharge round, I think I'm going to throw it back to you, Paul, as we've talked about some of the baby steps there. But really, how can someone that's listening to this and they understand they're in imposter syndrome, what can they continue to do to make it work for them? I know we've talked about some of these things, but what would you tell them for them to really move forward from this, to be able to take that action out of our conversation?
Yeah. Gary, it's first of all, think of the reframe that I always like to use. And it's just because of sort of what I like to do in my life is make things easy, make things simple. So the very first thing I like to do with imposter syndrome is just to recognize it for what it is. It doesn't have to be complex. You don't have to understand all the intricacies of the scientific knowledge. Just understand and be aware that, okay, this is what is occurring. And then, as you have said, and you gave that example of what occurred to you last night as you were going up to speak, recognize the value that you bring. Recognize the value of who you are. We don't do enough of that. We have such a level of discernment that we have that we have capabilities in our mind, but we overuse discernment, and we start to judge, and we judge ourselves and others, and we start comparing. And to kind of back up from that, before we even get to that, what's the value that I bring? It's interesting when I go back to my example back in 2007, 2005, when I was having the imposter as the head of HR. And part of that was just not understanding HR to the degree. But I thought to myself, no, wait a minute. Let me back up here. I know what it's like to be an employee and a team member in an organization. I want to make sure that I'm paid. I want to make sure that I have my benefits. I want to make sure that I work with some wonderful colleagues and have fun. Those are the things I need to do. And so in my role as a leader, can I do that? Yeah, I think I can have some influence on that. I caught my breath. And that's probably the biggest thing I want to tell people is stop, become aware. We hear this all the time. Take a breath. Just take a breath. The world now we're masked up, so we have to the cartoon figures we have with all of our masks on. It's so funny to think that, yes, but take a breath wherever you are and recognize the value that you bring. And you're just experiencing imposter syndrome, and you're in incredible company with people who have experienced it their whole lives, and who have gone on and with imposter syndrome have done incredible things. So it's just that. And then find a way to make it work for you and have a party with it. Have a party with it and hashtag celebrate imposter syndrome. And if I can do it, believe me, anybody can. So that's my point that I love to leave with.
Excellent. Great advice. And really something that we should have learned the last 2 years, but I don't think we have enough, is stopping ourselves and really breathing and moving forward, and be aware of what you're experiencing and knowing that your value, what you're bringing. And, that's one thing, if anything out of this should have come out of this. But I think what's happening is we're almost like trying to accelerate to another level right now. And It's about slowing yourself down. And I think it comes the same thing in imposter syndrome. Boy, Paul, I think we could kind of continue on for hours probably and have a great conversation. But because we like our audience members, we know they're busy people and doing activity. Before we go into our recharge round, would you share with them how they could connect with you, your website, any of the social media channels, and then we'll make sure it's all in show notes so they can easily access it?
Absolutely. So I can be found on most of the social media tribes and communities. LinkedIn would be a wonderful way. Paul N Larsen, Larsen. I'm there. I'd love to connect with folks. My website is paulnlarsen.com. Send me an email. I love to hear stories from folks about their imposter syndrome or how they find their voice in their life. And that's at paulnlarsen.com. Twitter, Voice as a Leader. Clubhouse, Voice as a Leader. Facebook, Voice as a Leader. So anywhere you want to find me, I'm there. I promise I answer. It is definitely me, because I believe in, in all the ways we have to connect in today's world. We don't actually do a lot of real connection. So I really, really appreciate when people reach out to me and connect, and I will definitely connect back.
And make sure you check out his book, Find Your Voice as a Leader. You can get that anywhere you buy your books, I'm sure, that's available, and I'm sure he's got it on his website, so check that out. Paul, before I let you go, I got 2 questions for the recharge round. Sure. My first question for you is, of course, CHARGE is the name of the podcast. That's an acronym for Create Habits Around Real Goals Every Day. What habit do you think's led to success in your life?
Absolutely. Finding my voice, which is why I wrote the book, which was discovering my values, establishing my outcomes, demonstrating my influence to myself that I can do it, revealing my courage, and creating a lasting expression that I want to have in the world. Values, outcomes, influence, courage, expression, voice. And that's what I did in my life. And that's the gift that I got from my parents and from my family. And that's what I do continually for myself. And
just think about that, folks, because he's defined it. That's the key. and that becomes the real benefit to it. So check it out. I truly think you'll enjoy that. My last question for you is, if you had one do-over in your life, what would it be?
Spend more time with the people that really matter. You know, I love that question, Gary, because I don't live with regrets. I just don't. So, but when I think about, you know, there's that wonderful sort of, I think we've probably all seen the palliative nurse down in Australia who worked with so many people as they transitioned out of our physical world. And she was talking to them, and she found that, you know, the 5 things that people want more out of life, but the number one was to really spend more time with the people that matter to you. And that's what I want to do. And so when I look back, it's like, to your point, we're sometimes under so much pressure and burden that we don't even take a moment to stop and breathe and to look around and say, this is what matters to me right now. The other stuff can wait. So that would be a do-over, would be to do over with an elongated timer, or to throw away my timer, so to speak, and spend the time with the people that really made me who I am and provided me that guidance and GPS in my DNA to really kind of propel myself.
Paul Larsen, this has been a great conversation. I can't thank you enough for saying yes to the Charge podcast.
Oh, Gary, it was my pleasure. It was an honor, and it was just absolutely wonderful. And what you're doing in the world is so important. And so the little bit that I can play with you on this is absolutely wonderful. But the honor is mine. And again, my gratitude to you for your graciousness and kindness.
Well, thank you very much for that. Chargers, I tell you, paulinlarsen.com is his website. We're going to have it all in show notes, all of his social media channels. So please check out chargepodcast.com, because we know you're active right now. You're not where you can write this down, but I do want you to think about this as we move forward. I always give you a challenge or more of an action to move forward. And I think Paul gave us that action at the end. It's still early in 2022. We've made a lot of goals. We've kind of set ourselves up. Sometimes maybe we felt like that imposter already. But my challenge I'm going to leave you with is the last thought he said. Who's the most important people in your life? What impact do they have on your life? You can do it in your head. You don't have to write it down. But the question I ask you is, what impact are you going to have on their life? That becomes where that time comes in. As we all know, we have children. Mine are all in college now, 23, 21, and 20, and it moves fast and rapidly. But who do you want to impact? But what is the impact that you're going to have on their life? Because someday you will not be there, and that's what they'll be saying. But you can write that script. Go write that script this year. That's my message to you. So make it a great day. We'll see you back here next week with another great podcast. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.